journaling that went along with that to hopefully illustrate and bring together the things that we have heard from the community yesterday about, are you listening? Are you willing to listen to what we've heard this morning about the need to really make yourself vulnerable, really position yourself so that the reader as well as the community knows who you are when you enter that space. So this comes from the premise of what we have been talking about for the last day and a half, which is this idea that in a traditional way of thinking about research, we are trained, right, to be objective, where we go in with a purpose. We are the expert, right? And this is where we start talking about listening and self-reflexivity to reverse this idea about who really is the expert in that space. Is it me because I am trained, or is it the community who have been living the things that we are going to be talking about? And then, this idea about how we in that process, and this is something that I also struggle with, being in a place where that you have to do certain things to be able to get rewarded or awarded, right, to move ahead. But at the same time, knowing that when I do that, I am actually speaking for the community. I am representing the community through that work, that is really my voice that is being heard, even though I say it's a representation of the community. And so it's great to kind of follow up with the discussion that Amber and Mohan were having about as CCA as a methodology. How do we connect those spaces? How do we challenge those spaces? How do we move forward in a way that we do not only speak about it, but we actually do what we speak about? So the premise, and what I hope to illustrate through the project and through this presentation, is that how we as a researcher can become part of that process. And that really is two things that I'm going to highlight, which is the idea of listening and self-reflexivity. Now, we've been hearing about this for the last day and a half, but what I'm going to do is really talk about, for me, what that means and how I use it for my research. What are the things that I pay attention to when I say listening? Okay. The first idea is that there is this notion of equality, that I am not the expert. And it has to begin in the moment when I decide I'm going to do research, that yes, I have decided, and I also acknowledge the fact that I decided I'm going to do the research. Yet, right, when you enter that space, there is still that openness of collaboration that says we are equals. I am also a student, I'm also a learner, as Collins mentioned and demonstrated earlier when he was talking about going in and asking, right? I'm here to learn. You tell me what is it that I need to know in order to then perhaps figure out how we can come together to help, to move forward. But the slides don't want to move forward. Yeah. But I'm not listening to them. Academia, right? Doesn't like what I'm about to say. Okay. Right. So the other idea that I accept, right, is that everything is authentic, but when I go to listen to the stories, I only get part of the story. I am never going to get the whole story because I am not part of that community. So today when I talk about my reflections, I will talk about how I am of the same culture, I'm studying the same culture, I am also faced with similar things, but yet I will never be part of that community in a way to understand their life in a complete way. So I have to accept whatever they tell me at that moment as the truth, as the authentic part it is. The next person who goes in might get a different version. That does not mean, right, that I didn't get the truth, that it was not real what was shared with me. Right, so in my paper, I begin with this idea that listening means the ability to suspend your agenda, your judgment, and become the non-expert, the student. This means that sometimes when I go in, right, with a set of questions, we don't talk about those questions. I become a counselor. Sometimes I just become a person who hears stories that has nothing to do with what the study, right, was designed or was for. But in a way, it still tells me a lot about the women. in a qualitative method sense, or if you're teaching a method class and you tell your students you need to go out and do 20 interviews. Now, they go out with a guide and say, well, did you complete your interviews? I asked my student this, but then I would ask myself, did I complete the interview and was it successful? Yes. But did I ask any of the questions that I wanted to? No. It had nothing to do with my agenda, but everything to do with what the participants had to tell me. So this idea it comes from the fact that we begin with this notion of self-positioning. And this idea is that it attunes me from the beginning as to who I am and what I'm about to do. So, I share with you, my position when I was entering a space. I come from the same culture as the women, yet I do not. We share language, religion, food, and tradition, but I'm not part of a marginalized group. I begin with locating myself in a culture that has given me affordances in life. I begin with acknowledging that my privilege colors my understanding of the context of the women's lives at the margins. My privileges limits my understanding of hardship, pain, struggle in life. Our narratives of gendered identities reflect two different worlds that we experience as women, but of the same culture. And so I am aware from the moment that I am creating that space for the participants to be who they are and to share that knowledge with me. The second part to this is coming with the leading to that is the idea of self-reflexivity, right? And academically, we would define it as the researcher becomes part of the research. It's a self-reflection, but what does that mean, right? How does it really work out in terms of doing your own research? So I share with you one of my self-reflection and the first day that I was about to go and do the interviews with the women. This is what I had written in my journal. As I ready myself to meet the women, I am fully aware of myself. This goes back to the point that was being made about who are you outside of what you do, right? Do you have your identity? Do you realize that, and do you acknowledge that as you are about to enter that space? I know I am not same, nor do I want to pretend that we are same, even though we share cultural similarities. To me, this is about respect, and respect is about acknowledging our differences. I know even if visually I look like the women, as soon as I speak, it will be obvious that I am not. The way I speak will indicate to the women of my privileged background. I dress like I just, so I decide to dress like I normally do. When I'm home, I'm from Nepal, so when I'm home, as a married woman, there are certain rituals and certain things that you have to fulfill. But in the choices of the clothings is a constant mindful effort to be who I am, regardless of who is in that setting. So if I was going to go see my elders, if I was going to see my parents, if I was going to the community, it still represents me. I do not change or pretend or dress down or up in a way that reflects the community, but really a mindful, conscious way of entering that space that I go in as me from the beginning without pretending to be a friend, when in fact it's obvious that that's a relationship that you build over time. So I decide, I dress like I normally do, right? My jeans, kurti, the tikas and the bangles and the beads and that indicates that I am married, but it also indicates that I'm clearly from a modern, educated family because of the way that I am dressed. This is really how I would be in any other instances as well. The second part to reflexivity is this part that you have to be, it's every part of the research. From the moment that you decide to do research, I think it goes back to your question earlier about, after the data has been collected and you go, aha, right now we're collaborating, now we have to be reflexivity. And the whole idea is that you have to, the moment that I choose that space, the moment I decide that I realize and accept what my position is in that. So this is the first day I went before the interviews even began. Right? At 8:30, I close the car door behind me as I hurry across the crowded city street. As I make my way, I think about the stark differences in the lives of the women I'm about to meet and myself. I'm not sure what to expect when I actually meet the women. I feel anxious as I walk through the narrow alleyway. I walk hurriedly to a 2-floor house tucked away from the main road. It bears no signage. I am greeted by a staff at the door. She knows who I am, an upper strata of social class, educated, a professor living in Singapore, and such uses language of formality and respect. I too, in turn, use the same language. Looking around, I immediately know that I am also different from the staff who work here. I'm also aware that everyone at the center is watching my every move. I quietly follow the staff to the director's office. She's not in, but I'm asked to wait. I'm offered tea, which I graciously accept. An hour goes and another. Neither the director nor the participants arrive. I am unsure what to do, but I wait. While I wait, I try to soak myself in my surroundings by observing and listening. At some point, the staff came in and apologized for my waiting. I smiled and assured her that I'm fine to wait and is not inconveniencing me in any way. And I asked her in turn if it's okay to sit here and wait. I think of the irony. I should apologize for occupying their space and time. Around noon, she pops her head in and asks me if I would like to order lunch. I ask her what the staff normally does, whether I can join in. I meet the staff, who eagerly ask me questions about me. I hardly get any questions in about the organization or about my potential participants. After lunch, I make myself comfortable back in the room and wait. The director arrives, it's 2 p.m., and I started my day at 8:30 a.m. that morning. We chat about the study. She calls in her staff and asks her to arrange someone to take me to set up to their VCT clinic, which is about 15 kilometers outside of the main city, to begin my field work. And I'll share you a little bit about the next day. The drive takes me outside of the Kathmandu city limits. As I watch out the window through the morning drive, I can't recall the last time I was here. The car stops on the shoulder of a busy main road. From the window, I see the staff from yesterday waiting for me by the road. I get out and greet her. I follow her across the rice fields towards a 2-floor house, well hidden from the streets. I navigate across a small, muddy, made-up pathway. My eyes are fixed on the house as I follow her. We arrive and she proceeds to introduce me to the center staff. I greet everyone in the same formal language as yesterday, and like yesterday, I am very aware of the differences in me and everybody around me. I am, however, certain that yesterday's interaction has already been relayed to the clinical staff. So the moment I walked in and I sat down and I became part of that, had already been communicated, because the way I was greeted and introduced and welcomed into that had already set the tone by my 6 hours of sitting in the staff room and having. Now, on a traditional methodological sense, if you are teaching qualitative research or anything, you say, well, they didn't do anything that day. Right? But in the sense of really the true spirit of self-reflexivity and really creating a space for conversation and listening, that I had already begun that process on that day. So I have 5 minutes, she says, so I'm going to skip through to the part about a little bit about the gender identity part and how the reflections intertwine and how my writing, and so you know who I am and how that sets up the setting. But what happens when you actually conduct interviews and I have to come back and write a narrative? So the two ideas is that there's a difference in our personal lives and that there's a difference in our social lives, because these are women who are commercial sex workers. So they are in that area, in that field, or working as they call PESA or occupation, is because they of different vulnerable situation in their lives, but most primarily because they are trying to survive and trying to support their own children. So the way that they end up in that situation, as well as the social relations, meaning how I am treated as a woman of the same culture because of my profession, as versus the women who also consider themselves to be in a profession and not just defined in a mainstream traditional way. So this is just an excerpt of the idea that runs through in terms of how they become sex workers and why they stay in that, right? I started this line of work because my husband was abusive. He took my citizenship and wouldn't give it to me. So in Nepal, your citizenship is tied to either your husband or your father. So if he has control of that, you have no form of identity or having to be able to find work. So he wouldn't give it to me because of land inheritance or inheritance for my children. Because she's married, and usually when you're married, you move into your husband's family and you take up his name and his identity. She cannot go back to her family because she's already married. And this is true of most of the women that I was talking to. To get a permanent job, I need that, right? She's doing this to take care of her children. So I share my own position with you in relation to the women, right? I know I'm part of a patriarchal society, but I never question how that gets performed, because I have never had to confront a situation where that has limited me in becoming who I am. In fact, I was raised in a family where equality is assumed between boys and girls, men and women. I perhaps do not question this as much as I should. I have become complicit in furthering this gender inequality. This equality continues in my life. I am well educated. I have not taken on my husband's name, though we live with his family. He is a stay-at-home dad and the caregiver of the family. We have reversed the traditional norms around gender roles. I am even more removed from how patriarchy is performed in the lives of the women. I have never claimed to challenge, although I've never claimed to challenge patriarchy, though we operate outside of traditional gender expectations, us as in and the two of us. In fact, what I've come to realize through this process is that I can challenge and live out those reverse roles because I'm privileged to do so. That privilege allows me to reverse those roles and think about that in a different way. So similar to in the social relations, so in social relations they talk about how they get treated outside of the family and by police, by community members, by society. So they're talking about that relationship. So I just want to get to the conclusion to keep with time. And the point of this whole discussion and the whole process here is twofold, right? That positioning myself, right, it also highlights to you my biases, right? What I'm coming in with, because obviously, I can say, well, I'm from Nepal, I understand the culture, I speak the language, so therefore I should be well equipped to be able to write a story, even a cultural sense, right? But it's still, even in that space, I am very removed. Right? So the whole idea is that that process becomes intertwined, that by positioning myself in relation to the women, you actually then start to get the whole story, right? Their story in relation to mine, because if I stay as an objective researcher, then I would come back and tell you my interpretations. But their interpretation is very different than how I would make my interpretations, because ultimately, right, I'm going to make that interpretations from the position I'm sitting in, not from their position. And which comes down to the practical sense of what we're doing, right? Because ultimately the whole idea of theorizing and doing all of this is that we can move forward and have a pragmatic sense of what to do with that. How do we really make an impact? How do we really invest ourselves in social change? And really, I think this is the key, which is that the interpretation, the solutions that I would propose from my position of privilege and interpretation is going to be very, very different than what the women really would want. And to start from the position where you acknowledge that really I'm not the expert. I know what I think the women need, but the women know themselves what they need in their lives, and maybe it has nothing to do with what I envision for them. So I will end here.
Thank you so much, Ishan. Thank you so much for speaking to the talk. Our next presentation is by Ricky Muntiola. Oh, okay. And co-authored by Pamela Custodio. And the topic is self-reflexivity in development communication research and autoethnography.
Hi, good morning. I'm Ricky Menzola. I'm from the University of the Philippines, Los Baños. the College of Development Communication. And I'll be presenting our paper about self-reflexivity in DevCom research and autoethnography. I've been thinking about this moment for a lot of sleepless nights, thinking about this moment because I'm really a bit nervous about being vulnerable, about sharing this very uncomfortable journey of mine through my research. So let me start about an overview of what I will talk about this morning. So I hope to achieve theoretical understanding in DevCom by reevaluating the role of dialogue as an embodiment of participation in DevCom praxis, and placing reflexivity in DevCom theory and practice, and exploring critical studies as a potential tradition in DevCom research. The autoethnographic accounting was done by the first author, and the analysis and tentative conclusions were derived through a dialogic encounters between authors, invoking a mentor-mentee relationship and a conversation between equals. Let me share to you this whole story made up of little stories in between. And this paper was an unforeseen journey for me as a development communicator and a development practitioner. And this was just a 5-minute conversation I had with my co-author, and it brought about this paper. So let me tell you about the context of this inquiry. It first started 2 years ago when I was conducting my undergraduate research. So this was the start of my inquiry. So my first research journey was I was a researcher from another province entering a community of IPs in another province. So I'm from Los Baños, there, the center, and I went to Oriental Mindoro. It's an hour away by sea travel and 3 hours away from the a 3-hour travel from Calapan, which is the capital. Okay. I attempted to surface an indigenous presence in the public sphere of mining discourse. This community is a community in tradition, in transition. They are already practicing the lowlands way or the Tagalog's way of living. They are already dressed in shorts, in shirts, and they have a lot of practices that's already with the lowlands, and I will tell you why that part is very important. And I use the Habermasian public sphere as my theoretical lens, and it assumes that its presence is communicatively constructed in the participation in the mining discourse. So this is a retelling of a research journey, and I went back in my mind. I reflected on this particular journey, and it led me here. Okay, so I consider myself a survivor of the story we are living. And today I reminisce my research moments with them, however worried that I might be a victor retelling history. Okay, so let me share to you this first anecdote. This was, I had a question asked from a competition in the University of the Philippines, Diliman. And this head of the panel asked me when I presented my paper on the first journey, my first research journey, she asked me, "Development communication is very beautiful, especially how you presented it. I saw the importance. However, aren't you afraid that DevCom will be a homogenizing agent?" I smiled as I remembered my conversation with my research buddy on the bus ride home from our first fieldwork. Back to the moment I realized we were never going to save the world. Okay, so I am here to share with you the same uncomfortable musing that I have been reflecting on this paper, that we, as researchers, as development workers, as academicians, are not gods. As experts of development, if I may label it as such, have we taken a step back to question our authority our sincerity. Okay, so let me give you a brief overview on development communication. From a simple economic utopia as the basis of development in the 1950s, it became a complex play of multiple factors and yardsticks that constitutes development. And the failed promises of modernization caused shifts in the paradigms of development. And it has continuously evolved to an integrated participatory development for an inclusive long-term sustainable development and other considerations in between. And because of this paradigm shift, DevCom also evolved through the years. DevCom is a convergence of two key concepts, which is development and communication. Development being the more important concept, communication being the vehicle toward to forward development progress, which is said by Nora Cabral, the recognized mother of development communication. DevCom research finds its beginnings in cybernetics and socio-psychological communication traditions, analyzing systems, behavioral correlation, and measuring knowledge and attitudes and practices. So let me share to you the current definition of development communication, and it has been the foundation of my it has been the foundation of my study from the first research journey until now, and it has been the foundation of my musings. So reflexivity and reflexive methodology. Okay, so Alvison S. Kohlberg said that there are two basic characteristics in reflexive research: careful interpretation and reflection. And reflection is a very personal experience. No one can reflect for you. And the cites 4 instances in where reflection is enacted. Okay, so continuous reflection to protect the danger in privileging one's own voice, the precondition of any objectivity of all scientific knowledge of the body. And okay, and autoethnography. So I would like to focus on vulnerability. This has been a very difficult journey for me in the case of reflecting upon it. And when I shared it to my co-author, it was a difficult journey as well, because acknowledging your vulnerability, acknowledging your humanity is a very painful process. Okay. And in order to feel trust, we need to feel trust to be vulnerable, and we need to be vulnerable in order to trust. And autoethnography is the embodiment of the human intertextuality of existence, because someone had the courage to be vulnerable first with themselves and eventually others. So let me gloss over my methodology. So I created my old recordings, journal entries, field notes, and presentation and discussion notes. And I had an iterative process of reflecting and discussing it with my co-author. And the most painful of all, writing. So here's my findings. So let me tell you this story about Cap Malakas. Cap Malakas is the tribal barangay captain in the area, and we asked for his permission to go into the field, live with them, interview them, have conversations with them. And he is very meek. His voice is often unintelligible, and he's very shy. But when you ask him, he's not afraid to speak his mind. I was talking to him. This is his house, by the way. We were talking outside about mining, and I was helping him recollect this meeting with the mining companies when the mining companies were trying to get in and exploit the environment. And when I was interviewing him, there was this moment that he asked me if those questions are really part of my study. And I said yes, and I was very taken aback about his comment. And he told me every time mining is mentioned, we become afraid whenever we hear it. And he attached this fear that I might be associated with them and I might be invading their space. So as I reflected upon this interview, I realized, did he disclose himself to me? Did I invade his space that much that he didn't give everything, he didn't share his all with me? This one, the story of Leader Pala. He is a cooperative leader of the farmers. I met him when we were introduced around the community. He's very cordial, he's very welcoming, and we went to his house, and he warmly had us there. He offered us water, and we were chatting him like we weren't okay, 5 minutes left. Okay, so this I was taken aback by his he was a leader, but he was not very open about sharing his own views in the community. He lets the authority to speak for them. And this one, he told me that I should come back to the community. And when I was hearing this on my recording, guilt overcomes me because it's almost 2 years. I haven't been back ever since, and it made me think about how should I approach this as a development practitioner. And the last is Makahiya. Okay. Makahiya is a barangay nutrition scholar, and she was the last of our participants to have our conversations with. She is very shy, and she's not really that sharing with us. And I found her resistance in our conversations with her. She frequently frustrated me as a researcher because I cannot get something out of it. But when the time when I was talking to my research buddy about this instance, we realized that her shyness might not be about her personality per se, but it was her silence that was resisting our invasion. So let me skip. Okay. So the place of reflexivity in DevCom research, because we have been claiming that we are the voice of the voiceless and we are speaking on their behalf. But have we questioned who are we to speak on their behalf? And claiming authority on a particular inquiry can lead to a danger of forgetting our situatedness in the inquiry. And I realized the innate Messiah complex can be a double-edged sword. That even with our sincerity, we could place a lot of authority in our recommendations as what they really need. But have we asked, what do you need? And okay, this question was asked when I presented my first research journey with my co-authors class. And there's this question, how did you help them? And it took me a while to answer it because I was aiming for a theoretical understanding, and there was no direct help that I made in studying this particular inquiry. And I would like to end this presentation with this with the answer to the question on the first anecdote, the challenge of homogeneity in DevCom. So because of this research, I learned to be reflective, to not always take things as it is, but to look deeper and ask uncomfortable questions. Maybe what we insist they need is not what is really necessary for them. The only guard to homogeneity that can be perpetuated by DevCom is continuous critical reflection on the dangers of its self-deception. For this question will always be a reminder. As a development communicator, have I forgotten where I am situated? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ricky. And to continue asking tough questions, the final presentation by Elaine and Eric Kramer, all the way from the University of Oklahoma. The title is Trapped by the Others Gaze, Homeless and Humanity in America.
Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody. I want to make some comments before I start the presentation. We have slightly changed the topic of our paper, and for some reason, the conference schedule stated that I'm the first author, but in reality, I really feel that, in reality, it's not about how I feel. My husband is the first author, and I'm the second author on this issue. The reason how this project started is most of you who know me would know that I study how people from different cultures communicate with one another in healthcare settings. But I teach all kinds of health comm classes, including public health communication. And that's by far my favorite class. And usually I have students participate, develop a community-based health campaign at the end of every semester. Throughout the process, the homeless shelter at Norman, Oklahoma became very receptive to our health campaign. And so in fall 2014, I decided to have this class that the whole class will focus on homelessness as a healthcare issue. And I plan to use homelessness as an entryway to allow my students to see the different theories of how social support, structural injustice could apply to a particular group and impact their quality of care. The class started with every student developed the group into 6 groups. They did their literature review. They present on specific health concerns or issues homeless people would face. And when I first started this project, I really think like a teacher. I wanted them to sort of have an applied way to imagine the theories they learned. But throughout this course project, it changed my mind about what I'm doing, actually. We talk about social change projects so far, and lots of people believe that that's what we do. In this course, I ended up telling my students that this is a social change project, but what I see that I'm most likely to change is not the problem of homelessness. We're never gonna save the world. However, I do think that there's a change that I see fundamentally in my students, how they start to see themselves in relation to homelessness. So these students before they walk in, they're required to talk to a homeless person one-on-one. Near the shelter, I ask them to interview homeless people at a place that's comfortable to them around the shelter. So I'm around, but it's a very private conversation between an undergraduate student and a homeless person. And they're required to have this 1 hour more or less field-based semi-structured interview. I gave them classes about qualitative interviews, the positioning of the interviewer and interviewee. I tell them about what is an organic flow of interaction. I tell them what does it mean when you ask questions like that as a student from the University of Oklahoma. I happen to have a football player, Aaron Rapelski, in my class. So the homeless person was super football enthusiastic, and he cried immediately when he saw that this is the person who's going to interview him. So this is a very interesting dynamics that's happening. And later, and of course, it changed me. I was so excited about all the data I have obtained. The homeless person got so excited that they actually start drawing pictures and gave it to our students, and knowing that we want to do some book project about their experiences. So I bring these pictures home, I bring these narratives home. I was talking to my husband, and very quickly we realized that some of these narratives are not about facts. These narratives happen because an undergraduate student from the university is asking them about their life, how they see their world. So as we're later during his discussion, we realized that one of the things that we don't want to do is we don't want to analyze these narratives in a way that, how we frame it or define it or interpret it. Instead, we want to situate these narratives in our own cultural context. That what does it mean when these narratives emerge in our culture? So we start to talk about seeing homelessness as a cultural phenomenon. We want to explore the cultural conditions that we live in that make these homeless experiences possible. And we want to reflect on the lack of sentimentality on this population and highlight the fragmentation of cultural consciousness and the desire to develop a universal, context-free understanding of the marginalized. And my husband is going to present the theoretical framework, and with each of his main points, I will use the pictures or the narratives that we gather from our data to sort of give you a sense of how these theoretical framework is backed up by real life experiences of the homeless. So, there you go.
Back in 1997, I published an edited book on homelessness. So I was interested in this topic for quite a while, and I was teaching in Washington, D.C., and I was in an apartment, and I was looking down, and it was February, and it was extremely cold, and I saw a homeless man trying to hide between two buildings. And then in the class I was teaching, I had the highest ranking person in the nursing corps of the United States military. She was taking my seminar, and I told her about this, and I said, this is, how can this happen? How can this happen? God damn it! How can this happen in Washington, D.C.? And she said, come with me tonight. And she took me and she handed out sandwiches in a park across from the White House, filled with freezing men. And she said, many of these are veterans. I'm sorry. Anyway, Elaine did some amazing work with her students. The dean loved her. She is promoted to full professor in record time. That's wonderful. And her students were shocked. Her class, she changed their lives. I wonder how many classes I've taught that nothing happened. Nothing. So I brought my giant brain with all my theories stuck in it. And I was thinking about what one of my old German professors said to me. One time he said, in the 1920s and 30s in Germany, you grew a goatee and analyzed. Well, not all of them. So I brought this theory in. I have read a lot of Levinas. Levinas was a student of Edmund Husserl, and they had a nice little debate going, where Husserl said that we constitute the other. And Levinas said, they constitute us. And about the time that Sartre developed the concept of gaze, which Foucault borrowed liberally, Levinas talked about the gaze of the other and how when we look at them, they're looking back at us. And at that moment, we are exposed and we become vulnerable and we become uncomfortable. And so I was putting this together with Cooley and Mead and how the other constitutes me, and I have no idea how I really look to others. I think I do, but I don't. I don't know how I sound. When I record my own voice singing, it's horrible, but geez, when I'm in the shower, I'm great. I don't know what happens. The tape recorder ruins me. So I plugged in some Gramsci, and we talked about, nonviolent resistance through Thoreau and Gandhi and all of that. But then something came back to haunt me, and that was Ernest Becker's work on what is culture. And I've written many papers on culture, and I know all the definitions from Malinowski up through Geertz and on and on and on. But Ernest Becker said that culture, one of the functions of culture, is to give its members a meaningful life, a way to participate meaningfully. And so looking at what these homeless people were doing and what they were saying to us, I began to formulate this notion of anti-culture. Not subculture, not counterculture, but anti-culture. I think we have developed a culture. Last year I published a book with 3 or 4 grad students on technology and the Extinction Vortex. As you all know, we're in the midst of the greatest extinction of languages and cultures and flora and fauna at the same time, ever in human history. There's something wrong. I think that's, I could say that without stretching too far. And I think that our anti-culture, we have created structures of value and exchange that are destroying us. And one of the greatest delusions is the delusion of privilege. We have people living in gated communities, nations behind gated military fronts, thinking they can somehow escape this, and nobody's going to escape this. We're all part of the system. It's a great delusion that I can buy my way, as Becker says, to immortality. It ain't going to happen. But unfortunately, that delusion is destroying a lot of things. It's driving and consuming. So what we did was we tried to get out of the way and let the homeless use us as a conduit to the academic press and to journalists. We wanted to show people that homelessness exists in rural America, in small town America. It's not just in Philadelphia or St. Louis or New York or Honolulu. It's in rural America. We also wanted to present a few facts about how many Americans are homeless or on the verge of homelessness. Many Americans go in and out of homelessness. It's episodic. And according to some statistics, half of all Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. They are one major illness away from homelessness. They are one layoff away from homelessness. And at the same time, they're totally deluded. You ask them and they will say, I'm middle class. But yet, they are under great stress and anxiety because they understand I'm right on the edge, which affects everything, mental health, physical health. So we decided to let her students just gather. We compiled it. I wrote some theory stuff, some fancy stuff with Levinas and Ernest Becker and all this stuff. But then we took it to the University of Oklahoma Press, and initially the editor was ecstatic. because it was about Oklahoma students, it was a new paradigm for teaching, and it was about homelessness in the Norman community. And then they rejected it. And I was very curious. And we were told it wasn't academic enough. So our experiment to get out of the way, to use our channel to let a subaltern speak was thwarted. Now, of course, we have all kinds of resources as academics, and we are finding other ways to get this stuff distributed, but it's been kind of distorted because we have to play within these structural rules that we live in. So we're trying to force open some doors. But I'm really so proud of Elaine. I mean, she just took an undergraduate class and got an IRB and said, I'm going to let these undergraduates, I'm going to force them with the power of grades to go find some homeless people. Yes, they're out there, and talk to them and find out about them. And it worked astounding. The students were dramatically changed. Many of them came away realizing that homeless people are people. And they were fixed by the gaze. Now, some of the fancy stuff I look at Orsine's grid, Descartes' XY, grid, and I think about space-time in a neo-Kantian sense and how homelessness are in my space-time, I'm in their space-time, but we're parallel universes. I'm driving to work, I'm on a schedule, and I see that guy standing on the street corner again. He's there, I see him. He's part of my world every day, part of my neighborhood. But somehow we're completely disconnected in our cosmic structures. I don't know. Some of this is coming out through other means, but I was disappointed in that. It wasn't academic enough. So. That's it. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. These are some pictures they drew.
So I'll just go through some of the pictures that they have here. These are all pictures drawn by homeless people. Some are colorful, others are less so. In the paper, we talked about how, in an effort to legitimize this suffering, we have built up cultural ideologies of Darwinian economics, and these are reflected in the homeless people's narratives. So these are like, look at what they all have and I don't have. Oh, look at normal people. Oh, yeah, I've been getting a little bit better. I mean, I already had been excluded most of my life, and now this is just one more stack against me that makes me even more excluded. I'm just sick of it. It's like I'm not a real person. So in a way to marginalize these groups, the society justified cruelty to these people. In some of the studies about shelters, they talk about how shelter staff define what is appropriate behavior, and you have to be appropriate in order to get assistance. In the end, in our manuscript, we talked about what is at risk is the question. All of us can justify such discrimination in a way to protect societal resources or to maintain orderly housing conditions or living conditions for the normal. But these are homeless people making sense of this. He said people have no idea. They think we're just a bunch of bums sitting around getting drunk. But it's hard. Nowhere to sleep and no one wants to hire you. You can't have good hygiene and they don't want to be around that and they don't want to hire you. They think that we're stupid and lazy. This is a reflection of Darwinian economics. And they don't know what it is like until they have slept on this shit right here, pounds on concrete. Until they do that, they have no idea what it's like. The people are sleeping in their beds. They have no idea what it's like to wake up on concrete slabs with a pair of shoes or a pillow if you have that. So these are very, very powerful narratives spoken face-to-face in private setting to an undergrad. And you know, at the end, I think this is a social change project, more so for my undergraduate students than for the homeless. Nevertheless, we argue that as we perpetuate such a culture that thinks it's okay to be cruel to its own members, what is really at stake is our humanity, because the people we're mistreating is in fact our own selves. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.